So Paul's whole point throughout this letter has been that we are free. Free. He reiterates that again in verse 1. We are free from the slavery of trying to get God's love and get God's acceptance. We are free from the exhaustion of trying to make it on our own. And his point throughout this letter is that the constant voice of the law, which says do, has been shouted down by the louder voice of the gospel, which screams done, done, done. Now there's a lot of talk out there about the fact that your failures don't define you. And thankfully, that's true. But it's just as dangerous to believe that your successes define you. So I read a quote yesterday that said, failure doesn't define you. It's what you do after you fail that defines you. Well, that didn't feel super relieving to me, okay? It's good news that our failures don't define us, but it's not necessarily good news that what we do after we fail defines us either. Feels like there's a lot of pressure. That's just as false, and it's just as enslaving. The truth is that nothing you do or don't do defines you. God defines you, and his definition for you is beloved. That's what Paul is getting across throughout this letter. That it's not what we do or don't do that defines us, either with others or with God. It's what God has done for us. He defines us. You are not what you do. You are not what you don't do. You are what Jesus has done for you. That's just a fact. It's his work that makes you right with God, not yours. It's his obedience that guarantees God's love for you, not yours. It's his performance that gets you in with God, not yours. So when he points out in the verses that I just read about circumcision, and we're like, well, okay, that was a rite, a ritual, a religious ritual back then that was required by the law. And there were a handful of people in the region of Galatia that thought, okay, well, I believe in God and I believe in what he's done, but now I have to go back and adhere to all the rules that God gave Israel way back during the time of Moses. And Paul's saying, no, that's over. Okay, that was over. In fact, God gave the law to Moses to expose the fact that you can't do what he says perfectly, which requires someone to do it for you. And so on and on throughout this section, he goes on to say that it's not the law or keeping the rules or being good or however else you want to say it. It's not that stuff that makes you right with God. It's God that makes you right with God. It's his work that makes you right with him, not yours. So Paul has taken 4 chapters to say in a variety of ways what Jesus said in Luke chapter 4, where Jesus said, I've come to set the captives free. In that chapter, Jesus gives us his mission statement. Why did I come? Why am I here? I'm here to set the captives free. And Paul's been saying that in a variety of ways for 4 chapters. Free from the demand to measure up, free from the burden to get it all right, free from the need to be strong, free to fall apart, free to cuss and spit and cry when life is hard, free from the burden of trying to impress God with our piety, free from the need to appease God with good behavior, free from the unquenchable pursuit to make something of ourselves. That's the freedom that he's been talking about. It's like I said a few weeks ago, because Jesus won for us, we're free to lose. Because Jesus succeeded for us, we're free to fail. Because he was strong for us, we're free to be weak. Because he was someone, we're free to be no one. So Paul has spent most of his time in this letter telling us what we are free from. But beginning in chapter 5, he switches gears and he now begins telling us what we're free for, or what we're free to do. Now, the reason this is important is because There are a lot of exhortations that follow in chapter 5 and chapter 6. And if we don't understand that this is Paul describing what we're free for, then we will see those exhortations as conditions that must be met in order to keep God happy with us. That's not what's going on. In fact, that's the very thing that Paul has been debunking for 4 chapters. So the exhortations that follow don't come in the form of you must, but rather because you're free, you can. Okay, it's super important. There is an unconditional framework around these verses, not a conditional one. And he wants us to know that the ultimate expression of freedom is loving. He makes that very clear in verse 6, which I'll read again in a second. And the point he wants to make is that only a truly free person can truly love, and the one who can truly love is one who is truly free. Okay, I'll say that again. That only a truly free person can truly love, and the one who can truly love is one who is truly free. So at the end of verse 6, he summarizes this by pointing out that the only thing that matters in the Christian life is faith expressing itself in love. That's what he says very plainly, very poignantly at the end of verse 6. What is important is faith expressing itself in love. And what he shows in the verses that follow is that the law, which he's been talking about for 4 chapters, actually prevents love from happening. And I'll dissect that in a few minutes. But that grace produces it. So the law prevents love from happening. Grace produces love. From verse 2 through 12 of chapter 5, Paul shows how the law blocks love for others because it turns you inward. It makes you self-absorbed. I read a piece of this article that a friend of mine wrote a number of years ago that I think illustrates this. He wrote, "You see it in the whines of a little boy. You see it in the entitlement of the teenager. You see it in the needless argument of the married couple over something unimportant. And you see it in the bitterness of the old man. None of us has escaped this disease. It infects all our hearts. It is the reason for so much of the brokenness, angst, and pain of the human community. What is this thing that kidnaps us all? It is the idol of self. The law makes it all about us. It puts us at the center of the story. We evaluate life from the vantage point of a scary and tragic me-ism. And as a result, we end up pulling the borders of our concerns into the narrow confines of what we want, what we feel, what we dream, and what we think we need. It is a life shaped by a shrunken kingdom of one." Well said. This is what the law does. It focuses all your attention on you. How am I doing? Do I have what I want? Am I succeeding in getting other people to notice me? Have I done enough to make him pay attention to me? Have I done enough to get respect from my peers? What else do I need to do? What do I need to fix? Who do I need to fix? Who owes me? Who has wronged me? The law forces us to look inward all the time. This is what I call lived out legalism. It's life by law. You don't have to be a legalist theologically. You can believe that it's by God's grace that we're made right with God, and that it's not our works that get us in with God. It's God's work that gets us in with God. You can believe that theologically. You can believe that intellectually, but you can live as legalistically as what Paul is describing here. Lived out legalism. It's life by law, and it's terribly enslaving and narcissistic. We end up so consumed with ourselves that we fail to see the needs of others. Well, he says in verse 6 that the thing that matters most, is faith expressing itself in love. In other words, the Christian life is outward focused primarily. See, the biggest difference between the practical effect of the law and the practical effect of grace is that the law turns us into ourselves and grace turns us outward. So when Paul says in verse 6 that what matters most is faith expressing itself in love, he's saying that faith is the source of love. Now, what do I mean by that? This is important. If you are in a relationship with another human being, this is super important, okay? Any kind of relationship. Martin Luther said, Christianity can be summed up in the two terms faith and love. Receiving from above, he says, which is faith, and giving out below, which is love. Okay, so Christianity, he said, can be summed up in the two terms faith and love, receiving from above and giving out below. Now, according to Paul, faith is vertical, it's upward, it's trusting that everything I need and long for, I already have because of what Jesus has done for me. All of the acceptance and all of the love and all of the approval and all of the meaning and worth and value and significance and security that I crave in the deepest parts of my being, I already have. The keys are already in my pocket. Okay, that's faith. It's vertical. It's upward. Love, on the other hand, is horizontal. It's outward. Because Jesus has done everything for me, faith, I can now do everything for you without needing you to do anything for me, love. Okay, so that's the connection between these two things. You could put it this way. Love is faith worked out by us horizontally or outwardly. And faith is love worked in us from God vertically. So faith is believing that we are loved unconditionally, and then love is taking that love that we've been given and giving it out. The implication there is that love is absent to the degree that faith is missing. Okay? If I'm not trusting that everything I need I already have, which is a lack of faith, then I will be looking to take from you rather than give to you, which is a lack of love. Okay, does that make sense? I'll say it again. If I'm not trusting that everything I need I already have, which is a lack of faith, I don't believe that, then I will be looking to take from you rather than give to you, which is a lack of love. So where faith is missing, love is absent. Or where faith is absent, love is missing. I will be concentrating, if that's true, I will be concentrating on what I want, not what you need. I'll be looking out for me, not you. It'll be all about serving me rather than serving you. I become primarily concerned with getting my needs met, fulfilling my dreams, satisfying my longings, making sure my expectations are being met. And this kills all possibility for real love to happen. So belief that everything we need, we already have. Faith in the fact that everything we need, we already have, becomes the necessary ingredient if love is going to be experienced at any level between us here on earth. Any relationship marked by law or ungrace feels like a prison. We know this to be true. We've all experienced this in different ways and to varying degrees. I will love you and accept you if you do this, if you stop that, if you work hard to make me feel the way I need to feel, the way I long to feel. It's impossible for love to flourish in an environment like that, where there is just rampant conditionality. I don't believe that everything I need I already have, so now I need to extract from you what I think I need to fill whatever void I have. So now life becomes more about taking from you what I feel will make me whole rather than giving to you. All as a result of not believing that everything we need we already have. Faith. Relationships, as you know, flounder in conditions of judging, where criticism is constant, where you always feel like you're being evaluated and assessed and falling short. This can be done in a variety of ways. There is a passive-aggressive way to make that clear to somebody. Okay, you just get quiet, or your sort of non-verbal language communicates to the person that you're not happy, you're not disappointed, you are disappointed, they have failed you, they have failed to meet your expectations, and that they need to change in order for this to be mended, in order for this to be bridged. Relationships flounder in those sorts of conditions. Where judgment reigns, relationships are ruined. Everyone loses when we keep score. Everyone. No one wins when we keep score. Relationships especially lose when scorekeeping is a primary mark. I read this at my brother's wedding, but in their book, Mistakes Were Made, But Not By Me, social psychologists Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson describe how a fixation on law can choke the life out of love. And this is what they say. Most couples who drift apart do so slowly, over time, in a snowballing pattern of blame and self-righteousness. Each partner focuses on what the other one is doing wrong, while justifying his or her own preferences, attitudes, and ways of doing things. From our standpoint, therefore, misunderstandings, conflicts, personality differences, and even angry quarrels are not the assassins of love. The law is. In other words, a lack of grace, the existence of ungrace in a relationship smothers it, ruins it, destroys it. It's grace that makes all the difference between a warm relationship and a cold one. Grace is. Grace loves without needing love in return. Grace is unconditional love in action. Grace liberates our relationships because we no longer have to ask another person to provide what Jesus has already given to us. Like I said a few minutes ago, if we actually believe that the acceptance and the approval and the love and the meaning and the worth that we long for in our deepest parts have already been delivered to us by God and that they can't be taken away, well, that changes my posture toward you. Now I'm not thinking about what I need to get from you in order to get to where I need to be, either internally or externally, but now I can be thinking about what I can give to you. Now I can give everything to you without needing you to give anything to me, because everything I need I already have. That changes. Grace changes everything about a relationship. And relationships become marked by one-way love. I am loving you, and you are loving me. And if you love me back, that's good, and I enjoy it, and I'm enlivened by it. But if you don't, I'll be okay, because all the love I need I already have. I'll be okay. I won't be paralyzed by your lack of love, which frees me to give to you without needing to get it back from you. So grace liberates our relationships because we no longer have to ask someone else to provide what Jesus has already given. Grace gives room for failure without judgment. Grace keeps no record of wrongs. Grace doesn't keep score, in other words. Grace looks at the difficulties in a relationship not as hassles to be endured, but as opportunities to love. The law points fingers. It's always telling us what we're not doing, where we're falling short, how we have failed. It's always pointing fingers, which is why when the law is thickly present in a relationship, the relationship becomes strained. None of us like to be around someone else who's constantly pointing out our weaknesses, showing us what we do wrong, in some way, shape, or form, highlighting our failures, making us feel like we're not measuring up, we're not good enough, we're not doing enough. Those relationships fail. Most divorces in marriage happen because that kind of environment has been cultivated. So the law points fingers. Grace, on the other hand, gives hugs, undeserved hugs, which is why relationships marked by law create distance, but relationships marked by grace generate closeness and intimacy. Now, none of this is worked out perfectly or consistently. All of our relationships are going to be marked by moments of law, and in those moments, there'll be distance, tension. And all of our relationships are also marked by moments of grace. And you know the difference. You've experienced the difference in any given moment between what law does in a moment between two people and what grace does in a moment between two people. You know the difference. You've felt the difference. You know that when things with somebody else are feeling light and enjoyable, grace is present. You feel like you can share the deepest parts of your soul with somebody and they won't blink. Those moments are sweet, and thankfully we get to experience those throughout our life. But we also know what it feels like to experience moments where the law is present, where we're feeling like we are constantly failing. We feel like our blemishes are being exposed. The things about us that we don't like are constantly being pointed out. In those moments, the relationship feels tense. It feels heavy. You want to get away from that person. You don't want to draw near to that person. You want to get away. You want to go in the other room. You want to get in your car and drive away. You may want to get in your car and drive off a cliff. So you know, functionally, you know the difference. And what Paul is saying in these verses is faith, which is belief that everything I need in Christ I already have, frees me to love. Now I'm free to love. And when you're free to love, grace flourishes. And in those moments where grace does flourish, we feel the freedom that Paul talks about here. The freedom to be ourselves, the freedom to tell the truth about ourselves, the freedom to fail and the freedom to succeed, the freedom to do something good and the freedom to fall on our face. We feel that freedom. So when Jesus says that his yoke is easy and his burden is light, when he says, "Come to me, all you who are weary, burdened, and I will give you rest, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." What does he mean? He means that when we come to him, he gives us everything we need. Everything. We no longer have to carry anything because he carries everything for us. He lightens the load. He means that we don't have to depend on ourselves or others to satisfy the deepest longings of our heart anymore. And this brings huge relief and freedom to our lives because now we can enjoy our relationships rather than needing those relationships to save us. Okay, I've said this before, but one of the things I bring up in premarital counseling when I have the privilege of doing that is to remind both the man and the woman that neither of them are Jesus. And while it may be tempting to look to your spouse to give you what only God is big enough to give you, the moment you do that, the relationship begins to flounder. I need you to become a certain way in order for me to feel secure, in order for me to be happy. And that person will never be able to do that to the degree that you need it. And when they don't, you cry foul. We cry foul. You are failing to save me. I trusted in you to be my Savior, and you're failing me. That's why resentment tends to set in relationships, because you're failing to meet my deepest needs. And I was trusting you to meet my deepest needs. I was banking on the fact that you would meet my deepest needs. And it's unfair. It's an unfair expectation because none of us are big enough to do that for one another. None of us are. So this brings huge relief and freedom to our lives because now we can enjoy our relationships without needing those relationships to save us. Now we can abandon our relational self-salvation projects, which induce so much stress and pressure and tension and unhappiness in our lives. So when Paul is describing freedom in chapter 5, this is what he's describing. How free do you feel in moments where you know you are unconditionally accepted and loved by another person? How free do you feel? That moment may be fleeting, but in that moment, the freedom that you feel is tangible. It's real. It's like a taste of what will one day be a permanent reality. A taste, a wink from God. So in Jesus, the life-giving God speaks into our deepest relational insecurities and says, I got this. Others may let you go, but I will never let you go. Others may leave you, but I will never leave you. Others may forsake you, but I will never forsake you. Others may reject you, but I will never reject you. I love you, and I take care of those I love with every resource I own. I am everything you need. Now, go enjoy the freedom of loving others with no strings attached. Go love. You don't need to get it anymore because you already have it. So now go enjoy the freedom. I mean, think about what life would feel like if there was no resentment whatsoever, no grudges, no relational breakdown because one or the other person has failed the other. Think about how free that would feel. Think about how free that does feel when it does happen in any given moment in our lives. So in Jesus, this life-giving God speaks into our deepest relational issues and says, I got you. Okay, I got you. Everything you need, I have for you. And I love you. And I take care of those I love with every resource I own. So you don't need to worry about looking behind every tree or under every rock for that thing or those things that you feel you need. I've already given it to you. Now go out and enjoy the freedom of loving with no strings attached. Enjoy it.